She woke to silence that felt too heavy to belong to her small apartment, the kind of quiet that pressed against her ears and made her heart beat louder than it should. The ceiling above her wasn't cracked with age or stained by a leaky pipe. It was smooth, pale, and unfamiliar, bordered by soft lighting that glowed like dawn even though the curtains were drawn. For a few seconds, she lay still, blinking, trying to understand why the bed beneath her felt impossibly wide and why the sheets smelled faintly of cedar and expensive cologne. Then she moved, and the fabric slid against her skin in a way that made her freeze. She wasn't wearing her pajamas. She wasn't wearing anything familiar at all. Her fingers curled into thick cotton, oversized and warm, and when she looked down, her breath caught. She was wearing a man's shirt. Not just any shirt, but one that swallowed her frame, the sleeves nearly covering her hands, the buttons undone enough to remind her that nothing else was underneath. Panic fluttered in her chest as she sat up, the room slowly coming into focus. This wasn't her bed. This wasn't her life. And somehow, terrifyingly, it was her birthday. The memory of the night before should have been waiting for her, but her mind was a locked door. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing something, anything, to come back. There had been laughter, she thought. Music. A toast maybe. She remembered turning 21 felt like crossing an invisible line, like the world had promised her something new if she was brave enough to reach for it. She remembered saying yes to one more drink even though she usually said no. After that, everything blurred into shadows and flashes of color that refused to form a picture. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed the room itself was too carefully designed to be accidental. Dark wood furniture, a thick rug under her bare feet when she stood, and a city skyline barely visible through the curtains. This was a high place. A powerful place. Her pulse quickened as a single, impossible thought crossed her mind. Whoever owned this room was not someone you woke up next to without consequences. She moved cautiously, every step echoing too loudly in her ears. On the nightstand sat a watch that probably cost more than her college tuition, its face gleaming even in the low light. Next to it was a phone, sleek and black, face down, as if it were sleeping too. She didn't touch it. She didn't touch anything. Her gaze drifted to the door, half expecting it to open at any second. Instead, she noticed the shirt she wore more closely. The initials stitched near the cuff were subtle but unmistakable. She had seen them before, printed in newspapers and whispered in rumors. A last name people lowered their voices to say. Her stomach dropped. The stories came rushing back now, the ones everyone pretended were exaggerations. A businessman by day, a kingpin by night, a man who controlled entire districts with a nod and a glance. The mafia boss whose name was never spoken casually. And somehow, she was in his bed. Fear tangled with disbelief as she sank back onto the edge of the mattress. This had to be a mistake. People like him didn't collide with people like her by accident. She was ordinary, working her way through school, celebrating milestones with cheap drinks and borrowed dresses. He lived in a different universe, one built on power and secrets. Her hands trembled as she hugged the shirt closer around herself, the fabric grounding her even as it terrified her. She wondered if he was watching from somewhere, amused by her confusion, or if he was gone entirely, leaving her to face the aftermath alone. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second a reminder that time was moving whether she was ready or not. A knock sounded at the door, gentle but firm, and she jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. Before she could answer, the door opened just enough for a woman's face to appear. She was impeccably dressed, her expression calm, professional, and unreadable. "Good morning," the woman said, her voice smooth. "Happy birthday." The words felt surreal, landing wrong in the air between them. "Breakfast will be ready shortly. He asked that you take your time." The word echoed. Before she could ask a single question, the door closed again, leaving her alone with 1,000 thoughts crashing into each other. She paced the room, trying to steady herself. He knew it was her birthday. He knew she was here. That meant last night hadn't been a dream. It meant choices had been made, even if she couldn't remember them. A part of her felt angry at herself for the blank space in her memory, for the vulnerability it represented. Another part felt a dangerous flicker of curiosity. What kind of man ensured she was covered, comfortable, and not alone? What kind of man didn't wake her, didn't demand answers, didn't leave her exposed? She hated that the question softened the fear just a little. When the door finally opened again, she didn't turn at first. She listened instead to measured footsteps crossing the room, to the quiet confidence in each step. He stopped a few feet behind her, close enough that she could feel the presence of him like a change in the air. "You're awake," he said, his voice low and controlled, nothing like the monsters in the stories. She swallowed and turned slowly. He was exactly as the rumors described and nothing like them at the same time. Calm eyes, sharp features, an expression that revealed nothing and everything all at once. He looked at her the way someone looked at a storm on the horizon, aware of its danger but unafraid. "I don't remember last night," she admitted, the truth tumbling out before she could stop it. He nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. "I know," he said. "That's why we'll start with breakfast." Confusion flickered across her face, and something like amusement touched his eyes. "You're safe," he added, the words deliberate. "But your life changed the moment you woke up here." Her heart skipped, fear and anticipation twisting together. As he gestured toward the door, she realized with a shiver that turning 21 hadn't just marked a birthday. It had marked the beginning of a story she couldn't walk away from, even if she wanted to. Breakfast was served in a room that felt more like a private penthouse lounge than a dining space, sunlight pouring in through tall windows and painting the city in gold. She sat stiffly at the long table, hands folded in her lap, the oversized shirt still the only barrier between her and a reality she didn't understand. He took the seat across from her, unhurried, composed, as if mornings like this were routine. The staff moved silently, placing plates and cups with precision, then disappearing without a word. The quiet felt intentional, like a shield, and she wondered if it was meant to calm her or remind her who controlled everything here. She tried to eat, but every bite tasted like nerves. Finally, she looked up at him, unable to stand the silence any longer. "Why am I here?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He met her gaze without flinching. "Because last night, you walked into my world," he replied. "And you did it willingly." The word stung. Willingly. She searched her memory again, grasping at fragments that still refused to come together. "I don't remember choosing anything," she said quietly. "I wouldn't. I don't even know you." He leaned back slightly, folding his hands, studying her like a puzzle. "You knew enough," he said. "You knew my name. You knew who I was. And you still said yes to a conversation. To a drink. To staying longer than you planned." Her chest tightened. That sounded like her, reckless for once, tired of being careful. "But nothing happened that you didn't agree to," he added firmly, as if sensing where her thoughts were going. "I don't take what isn't given." The certainty in his tone surprised her, and some of the fear she'd been holding on to loosened its grip. She pushed her plate away, appetite gone, and wrapped her fingers around her coffee cup instead. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Do I just leave?" For the first time, he hesitated. It was brief, barely noticeable, but she caught it. "You could," he said slowly. "But it wouldn't be that simple." He explained without drama, his words measured and clear. The place they'd met last night hadn't been a random bar. It was a private event, invitation only, attended by people who watched everything and remembered faces. Her presence there had been noticed. Her leaving with him had been noticed too. "In my world," he said, "attention has consequences." The weight of that settled over her like a shadow. She hadn't just woken up in his bed. She'd woken up visible. She stood and walked toward the window, needing space to breathe. The city below looked ordinary, busy with people who had no idea how close danger and power really were. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her reflection faint in the glass. "I just wanted a normal birthday." He joined her, keeping a respectful distance. "Normal is overrated," he said, not unkindly. "But I understand the feeling." That surprised her more than anything else so far. She turned to look at him, really look this time. He wasn't smiling, but there was something human in his eyes now, something that didn't belong to headlines or rumors. "I won't force you into anything," he continued. "But walking away without understanding the risks would be irresponsible. For you." The concern in his voice was real, and it unsettled her in a way fear hadn't. They talked for a long time after that, about practical things at first. He offered her clothes, a ride, security if she wanted it. He explained that for the next few days, staying out of sight would be wise. The idea of being protected by him should have terrified her, yet there was a strange comfort in his certainty. He spoke as if problems were things to be managed, not feared. When she asked why he was being so careful with her, he answered honestly. Because last night, you reminded me of something I forgot, he said. What it's like to talk to someone who doesn't want anything from me. The admission lingered between them, fragile and unexpected. Later, alone again in the bedroom, she finally found her phone in her bag, tucked neatly beside the bed. Dozens of missed messages lit up the screen, friends asking where she was, jokes about her birthday turning wild. She typed a simple reply, saying she was safe and needed a day. It wasn't a lie, not exactly. As she changed into the clothes he'd provided, soft and simple, she caught herself thinking about him in a way that made her pause. She wasn't naive. She knew who he was, what he represented. But she also knew that fear alone couldn't explain the calm she felt when he was near. That scared her more than anything else. When she stepped back into the living area, he was waiting, jacket on, ready to leave with her. I'll have you taken somewhere secure, he said. You can decide what you want after that. She nodded, realizing he was giving her more control than most people ever got in his world. As they rode down in the private elevator, the space between them charged with unspoken questions, she felt the shift happening inside her. This wasn't just about a lost night or a dangerous man. It was about choice. About whether she would run from the unknown or face it head on. The car pulled away from the building, the city swallowing them whole. She looked at him, then out the window, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and curiosity. Turning 21 had opened a door she hadn't known existed. And as the distance between her old life and this new one grew, she realized something that sent a chill through her veins. Forgetting the night before hadn't erased its impact. Whatever had started between her and the Mafia Boss wasn't ending with a safe ride away. It was only just beginning. The safe house was nothing like she expected. There were no dark corridors, no armed guards pacing the halls, no sense of being trapped. Instead, it was a quiet, modern townhouse tucked into a calm neighborhood where life seemed almost painfully normal. Children rode bikes outside. A dog barked somewhere down the street. If she hadn't arrived in a black car with tinted windows, she might have believed she'd stepped into a stranger's ordinary life. He walked her inside personally, explaining the basics without making it sound like a warning. She would stay here for a few days. Trusted people would come and go. She could leave the house, but only with notice. This isn't a prison, he said, reading her expression. It's a pause. The word settled over her, strange but not entirely unwelcome. For the first time since waking up, she felt like she could breathe. Hours passed quietly. She explored the space, ran her fingers along bookshelves filled with titles she didn't expect him to own, cooked herself a simple meal, and tried not to think too hard about how quickly this place had begun to feel safe. That bothered her. Safety wasn't supposed to come from a man like him. And yet, when she heard the front door open later that evening and realized it was him, a small, traitorous sense of relief washed through her. He hadn't said he would come back. He hadn't said he wouldn't either. I thought you might want answers, he said, setting a folder on the counter. Inside were photos from the event, security footage, stills, timelines. Proof. She studied them carefully, her stomach tightening as she saw herself laughing, relaxed, leaning in close as he spoke. She didn't look afraid. She looked alive. That was you, he said gently, as if afraid to startle her. The real you, before the world told you to be careful. She didn't know how to respond to that. Instead, she focused on the images, on the way her body angled toward his without hesitation. Why me? She asked finally. It wasn't self-pity. It was logic. Men like him didn't choose randomly. He considered the question seriously. Because you weren't impressed, he said. And because you challenged me without trying. He told her how she'd asked him questions no one ever did, how she'd laughed when he deflected, how she'd called him out for hiding behind his reputation. You forgot who I was, he said. And I remembered who I used to be. The conversation stretched late into the night, the kind of talk that slipped past small talk and landed somewhere honest. She told him about her life, about working 2 jobs, about wanting more without knowing exactly what that meant. He listened without interrupting, without judgment. When she asked about his world, he didn't romanticize it. He spoke plainly about responsibility, about choices that couldn't be undone, about the loneliness that came with power. People think fear is what protects me, he said. It's not. Control is. She believed him, and that understanding made her realize how dangerous this connection could be. Not because he was cruel, but because he was careful. That night, lying alone in the guest room, sleep refused to come. Memories still wouldn't return, but feelings lingered, echoing without context. She wondered what it said about her that she wasn't desperate to remember everything. Some part of her was afraid that knowing too much would make walking away impossible. The next morning, he was gone again, but this time he left a note. Not instructions. An invitation. Dinner, if she wanted. No pressure. Choice. She stared at the words for a long time, weighing them like they carried more meaning than ink and paper. In the end, she said yes. Not because she trusted him completely, but because she trusted herself enough to face what scared her. Dinner wasn't extravagant. It was quiet, almost intimate, shared over simple food and low conversation. He asked her how she was feeling, really feeling, and waited for the answer. She admitted she was confused, curious, and more than a little afraid of what being near him was awakening in her. He didn't deny the pull between them. He acknowledged it carefully, like something fragile. Whatever this is, he said, it moves at your pace. The promise felt heavy, but sincere. When their eyes met across the table, the air between them shifted, charged with something neither of them named. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. The tension was enough. Later, as he walked her back to the safe house door, she hesitated. If I walk away after this, she said, will you let me? He answered without hesitation. Yes. The certainty surprised her. But I don't think you will, he added softly. That honesty unsettled her more than any threat could have. As the door closed behind her, she leaned against it, heart racing. She had spent her life believing danger was loud and obvious. She was learning now that the most dangerous things were quiet, patient, and willing to wait. Over the next few days, their connection deepened in small, unexpected ways. Conversations that lingered, glances that said more than words. He never crossed a line, but he stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, the restraint. And in that space, something inside her shifted. She began to wonder if the missing memories were protecting her or holding her back. Because the more she learned about him, the more she realized the night she couldn't remember had changed both of them. Not because of what happened, but because of what it started. And as she lay awake one evening, staring at the ceiling, she understood a truth she hadn't been ready to face. Walking away was still possible, but wanting to was becoming harder with every passing moment. By the fourth day, the safe house no longer felt temporary, and that realization unsettled her more than the danger ever had. She woke early, the quiet of the place settling into her bones, and found herself thinking about him before she could stop it. His measured voice, the way he listened like every word mattered, the restraint he carried like armor. She hated that her curiosity had grown roots. When he arrived later that morning, unexpected but not unwelcome, she noticed the shift in herself immediately. Her heart didn't race with fear anymore. It responded with something warmer, something that made her straighten unconsciously as he stepped inside. He asked if she wanted to leave the house for a bit, just a walk, fresh air. The offer was casual, but she knew it wasn't small. Being seen with him, even briefly, meant something. After a moment's hesitation, she agreed, reminding herself that hiding forever wasn't living. They walked through a nearby park where the world carried on as if nothing extraordinary existed. People laughed, jogged, argued over coffee orders. It felt surreal to move through such normalcy beside a man whose name carried weight in darker places. Does it ever bother you? She asked, watching a group of friends celebrate something she couldn't hear. That you can't just disappear into this. He followed her gaze. It used to, he admitted. Now I understand that every life has a price. Mine just happens to be visible. The honesty in his words made her bold. She told him she was afraid, not of him, but of how easily she was adapting. I don't recognize myself, she said. I should be running. He stopped walking then, turning to face her fully. Growth feels like that, he said quietly. Unfamiliar, uncomfortable. It doesn't always mean wrong. That afternoon, a crack appeared in the careful distance they'd maintained. It wasn't dramatic. It was a moment, small, human, unguarded. She laughed at something he said, really laughed, and he smiled without restraint. Not the controlled curve of his mouth she'd seen before, but something genuine that softened his entire face. The sight of it stole her breath. She realized then how rare it was, how few people ever saw him like this. The understanding changed something between them. Later, as they sat across from each other in the quiet living room, the air felt heavier, charged with words neither of them had spoken yet. "I'm not pretending this is nothing," he said finally. "But I won't pretend it's simple either." She nodded. "I don't want simple," she replied before thinking. The truth of it surprised her, but she didn't take it back. That night, she dreamed for the first time since waking up in his bed. It wasn't a full memory, more like an echo. Music pulsing softly, his voice close to her ear, asking a question she couldn't hear. Her own voice answering, steady and certain. When she woke, her heart was pounding, her skin warm as if the dream had left a physical trace. She sat up, wrapping her arms around herself, and understood that the wall between her present and her past was thinning. The realization brought both relief and dread. Remembering meant clarity. It also meant accountability. The next day, the outside world intruded. A news alert flashed across the television, his name mentioned alongside words like investigation and power struggle. She watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly as he read the same headline on his phone. "Is it because of me?" she asked, the fear sharp now. He shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "But you're part of why I won't underestimate it." That sentence lingered. He wasn't just protecting her from his world. He was recalculating because of her. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her chest. "I don't want to be a weakness," she said. He met her gaze, unwavering. "You're not," he replied. "You're a reason." That evening, tension reached a breaking point. They stood too close in the kitchen, an accidental brush of fingers lingering longer than it should have. She felt it then, undeniable and powerful. The pull she'd been pretending was only curiosity. He felt it too. She saw it in the way he stilled, in the control snapping back into place. "If we cross that line," he said, voice low, "there's no pretending this is temporary." Her pulse roared in her ears. What if it never was? She asked softly. The question hung between them, dangerous and honest. For a heartbeat, she thought he might close the distance. Instead, he stepped back, breathing carefully. "I won't be the one who takes your choice away," he said. "Not now. Not ever." Later, alone in her room, she stared at the ceiling again, but this time the fear felt different. It wasn't about waking up somewhere unfamiliar. It was about the growing certainty that what she felt was real, and that real things demanded real decisions. She thought about her old life, the plans she'd made that now felt small and distant. She thought about the night she couldn't remember and the man who refused to define her by it. Somewhere between those thoughts, resolve began to form. She couldn't stay suspended between worlds forever. The next morning, she found him on the balcony, looking out over the city like it belonged to him. Maybe it did, in ways she was only beginning to understand. "I don't know where this leads," she said, stepping beside him. "But I don't want to keep standing still." He turned to her, searching her face for doubt. Finding none, his expression softened. "Then we move forward," he said. Carefully. Together. As the city stirred below them, she felt the shift settle into place. Turning 21 hadn't just changed her circumstances. It had changed her direction. And as she stood beside the Mafia boss, choosing not certainty but courage, she knew there was no going back to who she'd been before. The decision to move forward didn't bring clarity the way she expected. Instead, it brought motion, and motion came with consequences. From that morning on, things began to shift around her in subtle but unmistakable ways. She noticed it first in the increased presence of security, not obvious, not threatening, but always there, a quiet awareness that followed her steps. He didn't explain unless she asked, and when she did, he answered honestly. "There are people who don't like change," he told her one evening as they shared coffee in the safe house kitchen. "And there are people who mistake kindness for weakness." She understood then that choosing to stand beside him, even cautiously, meant standing in the line of sight of others who might not see her as a person at all, but as leverage. The thought chilled her, yet she didn't retreat. Something in her had hardened, not into fear, but into resolve. He began to let her see more of his world, not the violence people whispered about, but the structure beneath it. Meetings where words were weighed like currency. Decisions that affected hundreds of lives with a single signature. She watched him operate with calm authority, never raising his voice, never rushing. It fascinated her how control didn't come from intimidation alone, but from consistency. One afternoon, after sitting quietly through a discussion she barely understood, she asked him why he brought her along. Because I don't want to hide from you, he said. And because one day, you'll understand this better than you think. The implication startled her. One day. He wasn't thinking in days or weeks. He was thinking long-term. The realization made her chest tighten with both fear and something dangerously close to hope. That night, fragments of memory finally began to surface. Not all at once, not clearly, but enough to unsettle her. She remembered standing on a balcony, the city lights below, the air cool against her skin. She remembered telling him she didn't want to wake up the next day and regret being brave for once. The memory ended there, like a sentence cut off mid-word. She sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding, understanding at last why she'd woken without panic, why the shirt hadn't felt like a violation. Whatever had happened, she had chosen it. The knowledge steadied her even as it complicated everything. In the morning, she told him what she remembered. He listened carefully, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That trust matters." She saw relief flicker across his face before he masked it, and something inside her softened. As her confidence grew, so did the tension between them. It was no longer just unspoken, it was acknowledged, contained, but present in every shared glance and measured pause. One evening, as a storm rolled in and rain lashed against the windows, the restraint finally wavered. They stood close, too close, the sound of thunder punctuating the silence. She reached for him first, fingers brushing his hand, testing, asking without words. He inhaled sharply, his control fraying. "If we do this," he said quietly, "it won't be a mistake. It will be a choice that changes things." She met his gaze, steady and certain. "I know," she replied. He didn't move for a long second, then he nodded, as if deciding something within himself. The moment wasn't rushed or reckless. It was deliberate, grounded in consent and awareness. And when he finally pulled her into his arms, it felt less like crossing a line and more like stepping into alignment. Afterward, nothing felt lighter, but everything felt clearer. There was no illusion that this made things easier. If anything, it raised the stakes. The next day, the outside world pressed harder. A rival faction made a move, subtle but aggressive, and she felt the shift immediately. Conversations hushed when she entered rooms. Eyes lingered longer. She hated that she noticed, hated that she understood what it meant. "This is the part one can't protect you from completely," he said that night. "People will test boundaries." She didn't flinch. "Then teach me where they are," she said. The request surprised him. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right," he said. "But once you see it, you can't unsee it." She accepted that risk without hesitation. Days later, she found herself at a formal event at his side, dressed with quiet elegance, her presence deliberate. She felt the weight of every glance, every whispered word, but she didn't shrink. She stood tall, calm, composed. She saw it then, the shift. People weren't just curious anymore. They were cautious. He noticed too, a faint approval in his eyes when he leaned in and murmured, "You're doing well." The praise meant more to her than she expected. It wasn't about power. It was about partnership. That night, back in the car, the city lights blurring past, she finally voiced the question that had been building inside her. "What happens when this isn't new anymore?" she asked. "When the danger isn't hypothetical?" He didn't answer right away. "Then we adapt," he said finally. "Together, or not at all." The certainty in his voice steadied her. She realized then that this wasn't a story about being swept into someone else's life. It was about choosing to build something within it, eyes open, consequences accepted. As she lay awake later, listening to the quiet hum of the house, she thought about the girl she'd been before her birthday, careful, hopeful, untested. She didn't mourn her. Growth had changed her, sharpened her, revealed strengths she hadn't known she possessed. She wasn't naive anymore, but she wasn't hardened either. She was aware, and as she drifted toward sleep, one thought settled firmly in her mind. She hadn't lost herself by stepping into his world. She had found a version of herself strong enough to survive it. The morning after the formal event, she woke to sunlight spilling through the blinds, warm and golden, and the quiet hum of the city below. It was the kind of morning that demanded reflection, and she found herself staring at the ceiling, thinking about how much had changed in just a few days. She had stepped into a world she didn't fully understand, a world of power, danger, and constant calculation. And yet, As she stretched and felt the lingering weight of his presence from the night before, she realized she wasn't overwhelmed anymore. She was aware, alert, cautious, yes, but not afraid. Not completely. The memory of him, standing beside her at the event, calm, controlled, yet subtly protective, filled her with a strange combination of safety and excitement. She had begun to see that fear wasn't always the opposite of trust. It could coexist with it, sharpen it, and make every moment feel alive. When he arrived mid-morning, he brought the same composed, quiet energy he always carried, and she noted the subtle changes in him as well. The formal event had been more than a public appearance. It had been a test, a way to see how she handled herself under scrutiny. He didn't discuss it directly, but she could read the approval in his posture, the way he allowed her to make choices rather than directing her at every turn. They shared a brief breakfast, his eyes meeting hers across the table with that rare softness she was slowly learning to recognize, before he suggested a drive through the city. "I want you to see it my way," he said. And though she didn't know exactly what that meant, she trusted him enough to follow. The drive was quiet at first, filled with the hum of tires on asphalt and occasional traffic sounds, but it wasn't empty. He spoke in fragments about his world, not the rumors of violence or control, but about the strategy, the choices, the constant balancing act of power and responsibility. She listened intently, asking questions here and there, never prying too deeply, never overstepping, yet soaking in more than she realized. "It's like chess," he explained finally. "Every move counts. Every decision creates a ripple." She nodded, understanding more than she had expected. It wasn't just about danger, it was about awareness, about seeing the consequences of actions before they happened. And as he spoke, she felt herself becoming sharper, more perceptive, more aware of the spaces she moved through. When they returned, he led her to a quiet rooftop overlooking the city. The afternoon sun painted everything in gold, and the hum of life below seemed distant, almost unreal. She leaned against the railing, feeling the warmth on her skin, and finally let her mind wander to what had brought her here. Her 21st birthday, a lost night, and the man who had changed everything. She felt a flutter of apprehension and excitement, the pull between fear and curiosity stronger than ever. "Why me?" she asked softly, almost to herself. He appeared beside her, silent, as if he had been waiting for the question. "Because you're not afraid of reality," he said simply. "Because you meet life head-on. You see what's there and still move forward. That's rare." His words echoed in her mind. She hadn't realized how much she wanted to hear that, how much she had needed someone to acknowledge her strength. The evening brought a different kind of tension. They were back inside the safe house, quiet except for the occasional hum of appliances and the faint sound of the city outside. She had grown used to his presence by now, comfortable in it, yet aware that comfort could easily turn into complacency. He noticed her attention wandering, the subtle signs of unease that came with the realization that she was treading a fine line between familiarity and danger. "You're thinking too much," he said quietly, almost gently, and she blinked, realizing he could see every hesitation, every fleeting doubt. She shook her head, laughing softly. "I'm just aware," she said. "And you should be too," he replied with a faint smirk. There was no threat in his tone, only observation and expectation. It reminded her that in his world, nothing was ever accidental. Later, as they prepared for dinner, the first real moment of intimacy between them began to take shape. Not in touch, not in confession, but in proximity and shared presence. He stood behind her as she fixed her hair, silent but present, and she felt the electricity in the space between them. Small gestures, a hand brushing hers by accident, a shared glance, a pause in conversation, held more weight than any words could convey. She caught herself wondering how much of this was reality and how much was the pull of the unknown, but she didn't resist. Curiosity had become courage, and courage demanded exploration. Dinner that night was quieter than the event, more personal, yet no less charged. He asked about her thoughts, her feelings, and even the small details of her day. She responded openly, surprised at how easily the words came. He listened, really listened, and it was intoxicating to be seen in a way that required no masks, no pretense, no assumptions. Between courses, she caught herself studying him, noticing the way he held himself, the subtle tension in his jaw, the way his eyes softened when he thought she wasn't watching. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. When their conversation paused, the silence was not uncomfortable, it was deliberate, shared, and weighted with unspoken acknowledgement. After dinner, they returned to the safe house, and for the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility of a future that didn't frighten her. The question was subtle, almost unrecognizable. Could she stay in this world, with him, without losing herself? The answer didn't come immediately. Instead, she lay awake, replaying the day, analyzing every look, every word, every gesture. And in that quiet reflection, she realized that the missing memories, the lost night, the uncertainty, they had all been catalysts, not obstacles. Whatever had begun in the chaos of that first morning was evolving into something deliberate, something mutual, something neither could deny. By the end of part 6, she understood that life had shifted permanently. She was no longer just a visitor in his world, she was an active participant, aware of the stakes, capable of navigating them, and increasingly willing to embrace the intensity of what she had chosen. Each day brought new challenges, but also new clarity. Each glance, each conversation, each decision strengthened her, sharpened her understanding, and deepened her connection to the man she had once feared, yet now could not imagine life without. And as she drifted into a restless sleep, she knew that the real story, the one that would define her 21st year, was only just beginning. The following morning, she awoke with a strange sense of anticipation, as though the air itself had shifted overnight. The safe house felt quieter, more permanent, almost like it had accepted her presence as natural. She dressed quickly in the simple, comfortable clothes he had provided, her movements precise, purposeful. Each step she took felt like a small declaration of her autonomy, a subtle defiance of the fear that had initially gripped her. He arrived at the door shortly after, as usual, his presence calm and commanding. There was no need for words, they understood each other in a way that transcended casual conversation. Still, she broke the silence first. "Where are we going today?" she asked, curiosity lacing her tone. He studied her carefully, his sharp gaze scanning her expression. "Somewhere you need to see," he replied, and she could tell from his measured phrasing that whatever awaited her would be significant. The drive was longer than usual, winding through streets she didn't recognize, past buildings that towered like monuments to ambition and power. She sat in the backseat, her hands folded in her lap, her mind racing with possibilities. The city outside seemed alive in a way she hadn't noticed before. Every car, every pedestrian, every flashing sign held a story, a connection to a world she was just beginning to navigate. He remained silent for much of the journey, his eyes on the road but his thoughts clearly elsewhere. She resisted the urge to speak, sensing that the quiet held a lesson in itself. By the time they reached their destination, a private club nestled discreetly in a less conspicuous part of the city, she was both nervous and intrigued. Inside, the atmosphere was refined, almost surreal. The lighting was soft, the music low and tasteful, and the clientele exclusive. She realized quickly that this was not a place she could have discovered on her own. Entry was granted only through invitation, only through trust. He guided her effortlessly through the crowd, introducing her to faces she didn't recognize, names that carried weight, connections she couldn't yet understand. And though she felt out of place, he never let her falter. His hand brushed hers briefly as they moved, a subtle anchor that reminded her she wasn't alone. She noticed the respect people offered him, the quiet acknowledgement of power, and the curiosity directed at her. She wasn't just seen as his companion, she was observed, measured, and noted. At one point, he led her to a quieter area, away from the main crowd. They stood near a balcony overlooking the city lights, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. "Do you understand now?" he asked, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. She looked at him, unsure what he meant. "Understand what?" "The reach," he said simply. "The influence, the control. This isn't just about me. It's about every choice, every movement, every person connected to this world." She nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. She had glimpsed fragments before, but seeing it now, seeing the depth, the precision, the delicate balance, was overwhelming. Fear pricked at her again, sharp and insistent, but it was tempered by something stronger, a growing resolve that she could navigate this world, and perhaps even shape it in small ways. As the night unfolded, she found herself engaged in conversations she never would have imagined, listening more than speaking, learning more than revealing. He remained close, a steady presence, but he allowed her space to interact, to make choices, to assert herself in subtle ways. By the end of the evening, she realized she was not just surviving in his world, she was participating. And the realization was both empowering and terrifying. She was learning the rules, the power dynamics, the unspoken expectations, and with each lesson, her confidence grew. On the drive back, silence returned, but it was different this time, less tense, more reflective. She thought about the night, the interactions, the people, the subtle exchanges of respect and influence. It's overwhelming, she admitted finally, breaking the quiet. It is, he said softly, not as a reprimand but as acknowledgement. But that's why you need to be deliberate. Every step matters. She nodded, understanding that every choice she made from this point forward carried weight beyond her personal comfort or curiosity. The stakes were real, and the consequences were not abstract. Back at the safe house, the quiet hours of early morning allowed for reflection. She moved through the rooms methodically, tidying, organizing, preparing herself mentally for whatever came next. Her thoughts drifted to him, his composure, his confidence, the moments of softness he allowed her to see. She realized how much his presence had changed her, how much she had adapted, and how much she now relied on the quiet strength he exuded. It wasn't just attraction or curiosity anymore, it was understanding, respect, and an almost magnetic pull that she could not deny. Later, as he appeared at the door, she felt a mixture of anticipation and calm. They had reached an unspoken understanding. No words were necessary for the depth of connection that had developed. He led her to the rooftop again, the city spread out below like a living map of ambition and consequence. They stood side by side, the air between them thick with unspoken possibilities. "You're ready," he said quietly, almost a statement rather than a question. She didn't respond immediately, feeling the truth in his words settle into her bones. She was ready, not just to witness his world, but to step fully into it, aware of the risks, aware of the consequences, and aware of the feelings she could no longer deny. As the night deepened and the city lights sparkled below, she realized that the person she had been before her 21st birthday no longer existed. That girl, cautious and tentative, had been replaced by someone alert, capable, and willing to face the unknown. And standing beside the Mafia Boss, she understood that whatever came next, she would meet it with awareness, courage, and the choice to act on her own terms. The connection between them had grown beyond curiosity, beyond fear, into something deliberate, something undeniable. And as they returned to the safe house, side by side in the quiet of the night, she knew that the real journey, the one that would define her future, her choices, and her heart, was only beginning. From that night onward, she embraced the intensity, the complexity, and the danger, understanding fully that stepping into his world was no longer an accident. It was a decision she had made consciously, and with that decision came both freedom and responsibility. And as she lay awake later, tracing the shadows across the ceiling, she realized that life, danger, and desire had fused into a single, compelling path she was ready to walk, step by deliberate step. The morning of her 21st birthday felt different now. No longer the panic of waking in an unfamiliar bed, no longer the dizzying uncertainty of a night she couldn't remember. Instead, it carried a weight, a gravity that came from knowing how much her life had changed in just a few days. She woke slowly, sunlight spilling across the room, and for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. The safe house, the city, the hidden world she had stepped into, they all felt like extensions of herself now. She moved quietly, aware that he might arrive at any moment, but calm, grounded in the knowledge that she had agency in this life. That agency had been hard-earned, carved from moments of hesitation, choices, and understanding. And as she dressed in the clothes he had provided, she realized how far she had come from the girl who had stumbled into his life, vulnerable and uncertain. He arrived mid-morning, his presence steady, commanding, yet softer than it had been in those first, tense days. There was no fanfare, no announcement, only the quiet certainty that he brought with him. She met his gaze across the room, feeling the familiar pull, the magnetic tension that had grown between them. "Happy birthday," he said simply, his tone almost understated, but carrying an intensity that made her pulse quicken. She nodded, words failing her, and for a moment, they stood in silence, a shared acknowledgement of how much had changed between them. The night she couldn't remember, the days of cautious trust, the growing connection, all of it had led to this quiet, charged moment of mutual understanding. He suggested they take the day outside, to see the city in a way that was theirs alone, away from the scrutiny, away from the expectations. She agreed, her heart fluttering with anticipation. As they moved through the streets, she felt both invisible and visible at the same time, noticed by him, respected by others, yet free to observe, to think, to exist without pretense. They walked in comfortable silence, only the sounds of the city around them, the occasional hum of conversation from passing pedestrians. And she realized that what had begun as fear, curiosity, and chaos had evolved into something deliberate. Every glance, every gesture, every unspoken communication had been intentional, shaping the bond they shared. By midday, they arrived at a secluded park, a quiet place filled with sunlight and the soft rustle of trees. She felt an unfamiliar calm settle over her as she breathed in the air, the world around her peaceful yet alive. He guided her to a bench, where they sat together, the space between them charged with the weight of unspoken acknowledgement. "You've changed," he said finally, his voice low, observant. "In just a few days." She turned to him, curiosity and caution mingling. "Have I?" He nodded. "You've grown stronger. You've seen more. You understand more. And most importantly, you've chosen to stay, fully aware of what that means." His words echoed in her mind, carrying both affirmation and challenge. She realized he wasn't just acknowledging her growth, he was holding her accountable, reminding her that choice came with responsibility. The afternoon passed in quiet observation, conversations carefully measured, the kind that allowed her to engage without fear, to listen without distraction. He spoke of his world, not in terms of violence or fear, but in strategy, decisions, and consequences. She absorbed it all, her mind processing, learning, understanding the subtle cues, the importance of restraint, the value of perception. And in that understanding, she felt a dangerous exhilaration. She was no longer just reacting, she was participating. Each decision, each observation, each acknowledgement of power and consequence was hers to consider, hers to influence. And as she walked beside him, she realized how deeply she had come to rely on his presence, not for protection, but for clarity, for guidance, for shared understanding in a world that demanded constant awareness. By evening, they returned to the safe house, the city lights glittering below like a sprawling map of ambition and consequence. The quiet of the house enveloped them, and for a long moment, they simply stood together, absorbing the tension, the charge, the connection that had grown over the past week. She felt the pull between them, stronger now, more deliberate, yet tempered by mutual respect and consent. He reached for her hand, just briefly, a small anchor, a reminder of trust and partnership. And she responded, not out of necessity, but because she wanted to, because she understood the balance, the boundaries, and the potential that existed between them. That night, as they prepared for bed, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From waking in his bed with no memory, to navigating the safe house, the city, the hidden world of influence and power, she had grown in ways she hadn't imagined. Fear had been replaced with awareness, curiosity with understanding, hesitation with deliberate choice. She had learned that danger could coexist with trust, that control could coexist with care, and that love, or the beginnings of it, was not about possession but about recognition and respect. And as she lay down, the city quiet beneath her, she understood that this was only the beginning. The bond they shared, forged in uncertainty, strengthened by choice, and tempered by consequence, would define her 21st year and beyond. Sleep came slowly, filled with reflections of moments both tender and intense, flashes of memory mingling with new awareness. She dreamed not of chaos, but of clarity, of the connection she had forged, the lessons she had learned, and the power she had begun to recognize within herself. When she awoke the next morning, the city still bathed in soft sunlight, she felt a sense of readiness, of purpose, of determination. Whatever the future held, challenges, threats, or choices, she was prepared. Not because she had lost fear, but because she had gained understanding, strength, and the awareness that every step she took, every decision she made, mattered. And as he appeared at the door once more, calm, commanding, and yet gentle in his presence, she met his gaze without hesitation. "Happy birthday," he said quietly. She smiled, the weight of the week settling into a sense of triumph, of growth, of deliberate choice. "Thank you," she replied. And in that moment, they both understood. Turning 21 hadn't been the beginning of a nightmare, nor an accident. It had been the threshold to a world she now belonged to, a world of consequence, of power, of connection, and of undeniable, deliberate choice. And together, they stepped into it, aware, ready, and unafraid. Her 21st birthday had ended not in confusion or fear, but in clarity, in connection, in the realization that life, danger, and desire had fused into a single path she was prepared to walk. And as the night settled over the city, she knew, truly knew, that the story was far from over. It had only just begun, and she would face it with eyes wide open, heart steady, and every step deliberately chosen.